Hey, everybody. Happy Thursday night to you. Welcome into Cover4 Live. My name is Brandon Adams. Happy to have Connor Riley, Mike Griffith. Jeff SENTELL is here somewhere, although he doesn't appear to be sitting in his chair at the moment. But we're glad you're here, most importantly. We've got a lot to talk about tonight. Georgia's hired a new defensive backs coach. We'll get into that. The Georgia 2021 schedule was released on Wednesday. We'll certainly talk about that. But I do want to begin with the big news of the day. Five-star quarterback of the class of 2022, Gunnar Stockton, chose Georgia today. I would suggest, surprisingly, not based on the news of the last 12 to 24 hours. There had been some chatter connecting him to UGA, but when he initially decommitted from South Carolina after Will Muschamp got fired, my assumption is he would probably follow Mike Bobo to Auburn. That is not what happened. So kind of before we get into what's next for Stockton once he arrives at Georgia, let's at least spend a minute here talking about what happened today. Jeff, just give me your quick take, since you've covered Stockton for as long as you have, on the decision of Gunnar to be a part of Georgia's 2022 class.
Stability, comfort. I think maybe the young man was burdened by watching an ideal situation at South Carolina change and then migrate to Auburn, and then kind of wondering what was the best fit for him. And he really looked around and he thought, Georgia was the place that kind of stayed the same. We've laid a story up on Stockton today on DawgNation.com. Is folks, there are a slew of dudes that the Stockton commitment to Georgia moved the dial. And I'm going to take you to one quick point his father said. He said he expects up to half of the Georgia class, and I'm going to really condense this, to be boys, guys that Gunnar Stockton knows really well, that Gunnar Stockton's commitment is influential in their decision to become a Bulldog.
That's certainly good news. But, Mike, one of the things that surprised me upon the initial announcement from Stockton is the fact that not everybody seemed to treat it as you would typically expect a fan base to treat a five-star quarterback's arrival. Some people wondering what this would do in terms of a quarterback competition between, you presume, Brock Vandagriff, the five-star Sonny from this year, and Stockton, presumably a five-star Sonny for the class of 2022, maybe bringing back up bad memories from the situation in 2018 with Jake Fromm, Justin Fields, or whatever. But, Mike, were you as surprised as me to see not necessarily unanimous celebration of the Stockton pledge today? Mike, I believe you may be muted. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I was going to say not really, BA. A lot of people that follow recruiting don't really understand football. If it's not Gunnar Stockton, it's going to be somebody else that they're going to sign in the next class. And as Dabo Sweeney said, and as Kirby Smart says, you don't go out and recruit backup quarterbacks, right? You go out and you try and recruit starters every year. So, there's people who don't really have much of a level of sophistication if you're going to be criticizing, Gunnar Stockton or Georgia from trying to add a lot of talent. I mean, this is nothing like Jake Fromm and Justin Fields. I mean, we haven't even seen, Brock Vandagriff, throw his first ball amongst great competition. All we know is that he led a private 1A state championship school to a championship. We don't know how he's going to adjust. We don't know how Gunnar Stockton's going to adjust. We don't even know if Gunnar Stockton's going to make it to campus. This is a commitment. Signing day is a long way off. So there's no reason for anybody to panic or to worry or have any sort of consternation. The objective, if you're Georgia, is to try to get the best players interested in your program. As Jeff just explained, there's a lot of residual value to that. There's a lot of people on the outskirts that are more players are going to be interested in Georgia because now your 2018 class looks strong. So I don't expect fans to understand or agree with Kirby Smart, but I think he makes $7 million for a reason.
There's at least one thing that Mike said there that I agree with, which is I don't think this is a time.
Well, I'm glad there's at least one. I was worried there'd be nothing that you agreed with. So tell me what the one thing was.
I think you're right when you say this is certainly no reason for Georgia fans to panic. But, Connor, I do think it is legitimate to say when you have five stars, not two classes in between each other, but in back-to-back classes, how you manage that and avoid, I'll use the popular phrase here, quarterback controversy. I do think figuring out how you avoid that controversy is probably an appropriate thing for Georgia to be thinking about, and certainly fans are going to think about it no matter what. So how do you avoid that with Vandagriff and Stockton if they both are here in 2022 and if they are both as good as we think they have a chance to be?
You avoid the quarterback controversy if you just went on the field. That cures everything. the Trevor Lawrence, Kelly Bryant drama from 2018, where Kelly Bryant led them to a college football playoff appearance, and then they inserted Trevor Lawrence, didn't become an issue once Trevor Lawrence proved he was that good, won them a college football playoff game, won them a national championship. If Jake Fromm beats Alabama in the 2018 SEC championship game, where he played really well that day, the controversy surrounding Justin Fields and his decision to leave, I think, is really different. Yes, it is a tough juggling act, but there's a quote from Stockton's dad, which you can read in Jeff SENTELL's story today. And the word that really stuck out to me was stability and continuity of relationships. This sounds like a commitment for a guy who, obviously playing time matters to him. He's a competitor. We interviewed him back in September when he played Vandagriff, and that was something that was very important to Stockton. But having that stability, that maintaining the same thing, I think Georgia has that right now. I think that's ultimately why they went out, and his commitment. And if Georgia keeps winning, I think Stockton's going to be okay if he has to sit a year behind Brock Vandagriff, because Vandagriff in front of him is winning, and Stockton can very likely keep winning behind him.
But Jeff, let me just push back on one thing that Connor said there. I think one of the most telling things from the Justin Fields era was actually near the very beginning of it, when after Georgia had gone on the road, beaten up, which was at the time a top 25 ranked South Carolina, and Zach Klein, the reporter anchor for WSB TV, captured Justin Fields walking off the field in Columbia, and he was already upset with how little he'd played and what he got a chance to do and garbage time playing there that day. So Connor's point of, and Connor can obviously respond to his own point as well, but Connor's point that that as long as you're winning, it takes care of itself. The issues with Fields at Georgia actually started before Georgia ever lost a game. After a very big win early in the season, Fields was already shown some signs of being restless, as captured on video by a television reporter. So I would suggest that winning alone is not enough to keep everybody happy when it comes to playing time, because all competitors want to play.
Hey, Connor, would you like the dignity of replying to your rebuttal of the pushback of your point before I hop in there?
Yes, I would. If I remember correctly, and I like to think that I do here because I wrote the story aggregating that video clip, Fields was upset not so much about his playing time, but the fact that he wasn't throwing the ball. I believe the direct quote was, "Man, I sure handed the ball off well there." So, and this is something we've talked about here on before, Georgia has to throw the football more. I think if Georgia is doing that with Stockton, whether it be in blowouts or whatever the case is, I think that might play into it as well. And again, every situation, every kid is different. Fields probably thought that he could come in here and play right away, and Gunnar Stockton's going to have a chance, I think, maybe unlike Justin Fields did, to potentially earn that starting spot right away, assuming JT Daniels goes on to the pros after the season.
No, wait. Connor, wait. Why are you saying, no, let me ask you a question. I want to ask you a question. Why are you saying that Justin Fields didn't have a chance to earn a starting spot?
I would like to finish my point before I answer your question. Gunnar Stockton, you just totally derailed me, Mike. But what was your question again?
He asked you why you thought you go ahead, Mike.
You asked that maybe Gunnar Stockton will have a chance to win the starting job, unlike Justin Fields. Why do you think Justin didn't have a chance to win the starting job?
Because Jake Fromm led Georgia to a national championship the year before, and I don't think Brock Vandagriff is going to do that this season.
Better. It wasn't that Justin didn't have a chance. It's just the odds were landslide against him. He had a chance if he went in there, but it was going to be very difficult, is the point. And I totally, that's one thing, as BA would say, that I agree with that you said.
But Mike, I'll turn the question back around on you. Fair or not, do you think Justin Fields feels like he had a chance to earn the starting job? Regardless of what you think of the situation, how do you think Fields views his time in Athens?
Well, and I'll agree with what Connor said. He was not happy that he did not have the opportunity to throw the ball in the fourth quarter of those football games. And that's back when Kirby Smart was running the football and thinking that this is a guy they needed to bring along, because every time he went back to pass, he was deer in the headlights when the first read wasn't there, and he would tuck it and run, and he would endanger himself, and they couldn't afford for Justin to hurt himself scrambling in the second or third or fourth game of the season.
Because, Jeff, my point here is two things. Connor and I were at Super Bowl Media Days a couple years ago, and Trent Dilfer told us that he told Justin Fields not to come to Georgia. So Fields bears some responsibility for whatever happened at UGA. But beyond that, somehow, some way, I believe that Fields thought he was going to get an opportunity at Georgia that I think he would say he never actually got. Whatever the truth is, that's in the eye of the beholder. but I believe that's what Fields might say about that. So, Jeff, I would say when it comes to Vandagriff and Stockton, one way or another, this Georgia coaching staff now needs to make sure that these guys are all on the same page about exactly how things are going to go on here. Well, if you do have a fully entrenched starting quarterback, the odds of you beating him out before the first game of the season are probably not very good. And, maybe the communication with the Fields camp could have been a little bit better back in 2018.
Yeah, I think to get to the crux of the matter, I think the Stockton Vandagriff saga will be a lot different than the Fields from saga for a few reasons. One, Mike, I will say that I have probably 100.7% confidence that Stockton winds up at Georgia. Stockton is done with his recruiting. I guess let's never say never. If Kirby Smart gets the Houston Texans job in a year, then obviously things might change there. But we're not expecting that. I guess I should give him the New England Patriots job or something like that. But this is what Stockton wanted. Stockton, he didn't want speed dating to a starting quarterback job in a college. He wanted to get married up. That was the term that's been, used for me a lot in trying to explain his situation. Married up means is that he wants to commit to a guy. And I don't know if Monken's going to be here in 2023. Probably not. It's probably going to be Faulkner as he moves up in a role. But they wanted to find the same faces, the same stability right now as a junior that he'll see junior, senior year at Georgia. I think that's important. I think Kirby Smart brings that stability. I just want to underscore the thing that I think is what makes this totally different. And I think we've hinted at it, is there's not going to be a body of work separator between these two. As we might imagine what's going to happen here, JT Daniels is going to probably throw for 3,700 yards and 37 touchdowns and 5 picks, and Georgia's going to win at least 10 games, and he's going to get his first-round draft slot. And then Gunner and Brock will, besides the year head start, I guess it kind of sort of feels like, does anybody really think Carson Beck's got a year head start on Brock Vandagriff right now? Because he has been in program, he's been in spring practices, he's been in scrimmages, he's taken some snaps in an actual ball game. I don't know if that's a big gap. So I think the thing that's differently is really they're both going to start. Maybe you would give Vandagriff about a 7 or 8 yard head start, but there won't be a huge body of work separating the two. And then their work in production and practice and in games is going to decide the matter.
Let me try to just cut to the chase on this, though, Connor. I have a hard time imagining, or plenty of people would probably have a hard time imagining, that both Stockton and Vandagriff will each be at Georgia for at least 3 years. Is that a problem in your mind? Or do you disagree with that premise?
I think Gunnar Stockton and Justin Fields are very, from the interactions that I've had with them, and Jeff knows them better than I do, but they're just different people. Justin is he wants to go in and play right away and be the guy. And that's what he was at Ohio State. And he proved to be that. And there's a reason he's going to be a very successful, I think, NFL quarterback. Gunnar Stockton, from my impressions of him and getting to know him, he's not wired the exact same way that Justin Fields is. Now, that doesn't mean that they both can't be successful, but I'd also add, guys transfer out of programs all the time. You look at Alabama this past year. Talia Tagovailoa transferred out to Maryland. He's successful there. And then Mac Jones is successful at Alabama. So it's a reality I think you have to live with and acknowledge, hey, it could happen someday. And the PR hit that comes with another 5-star quarter transfers out. But I think we can even look at this Georgia team. And yes, quarterback is a very different position than everything else. But look at outside linebacker. Brenton Cox transfers out because of playing time. And Azeez Ojulari is going to go on to be a first-round pick this year. So I understand the hemming and hawing that comes with that. But at the same point in time, you have to play the best guys, and regardless of where they might be.
Jeff, I'm going to let you jump in, but first, let me just say this back to Connor, that I agree with his first point in that there is no PR hit for me if one of the quarterbacks leaves, as long as the guy that is here plays really well and goes on to have an outstanding career. Jeff, what do you want to say?
Yeah, I think people got to look at Georgia fans in Dog Nation. Walk down the road with me on this. They've seen the absolute worst ways a quarterback situation can work out with Eason and then with Fields. Now, let's flip it around. Almighty Alabama, for instance, circumstantial. If we go back to the thing, Jalen Hurts maybe doesn't get hurt, or he's moderately effective against Georgia. Tua Tagovailoa never comes into that game in 2018 to beat Georgia. Then Tua Tagovailoa is transferring out, folks. That's the way it would have worked. I think Alabama.
He's on the record as saying that.
Yeah, Alabama benefits from, hey, that was the best possible situation for Alabama and for the really talented backup. Now, Nick Saban sailing under some lucky stars. Let's say that doesn't work out that way, and then Tua Tagovailoa might be having his Justin Fields moments at Oregon or USC or something like that, and people are wondering what happened here. I think that's one thing when everybody looks about Georgia, and will this be another Fromm and Fields? What if it works out the right way where there's an injury to the starter and then Georgia keeps up a championship level offense because they would slide in Vandagriff for Stockton or Stockton for Vandagriff? It can work that way too, folks.
Mike, let me ask you, just basic premise that we were kind of addressing a moment ago. Do you think it's a foregone conclusion that Georgia will eventually have to choose between Vandagriff and Stockton?
No, I don't. Like I said, I don't limit this to anything. I think this is, if anything, a good problem. I mean, you're collecting a lot of talent, right? And Jeff made the point that maybe someone gets injured, like Eason, and Connor made the point that unlike what Justin Fields entered into, where yeah, he had a chance to compete, but you're not going to, in all intents and purposes, getting Connor's point here, you're not going to unseat a guy that just led a team to a national championship. No matter what you do, Jake's going to be the guy and have to lose the job. So I would agree with, just kind of backtrack, understand that point that Connor was making. Yeah, there was competition, but how do you win it unless you prove you can do it in the games? And when you get in the games, you're not throwing it. So I think because the competition will be open, and I'm assuming that, Jeff says 107% that Stockton will absolutely sign in a year. I'm going to go ahead and go with that premise. I'm more interested. Honestly, my head spins right now to Carson Beck. I want to know if he's going to be in the program. I want to know how the Vandagriff family feels about this. If anybody, might get a little upset, it would seem like it'd be the Vandagriff family who've, been very careful to, have a very particular path for Brock. The dad's the coach. They're at a private 1A school where they can dominate competition. They sign with the local program. This has been a very sheltered and protected career path for Brock. Now, all of a sudden, the guy that beat him this year head-to-head is going to be coming right up behind him to compete with them again. And by the way, there's still a guy ahead of him, that has all of his eligibility. Carson Beck and Brock Vandagriff, for all intents and purposes, have the exact same eligibility clock because everybody's clock was frozen this year. So there's a lot of other issues more pressing for me. I want to know if this leads to it, and you may be going there next, BA, so forgive me if I'm blowing your transition, but my biggest question is, what does this mean for Carson Beck right now?
So let's talk about Beck. I do want to do that before we're done, but Jeff, let me address something else that Mike brings up. And off the top of my head, I'm not quite so sure what's true and what's not, in that, does it appear, is what appears to be true actually true, that Georgia is more aggressive in signing quarterbacks in consecutive classes than other programs are? Year between DJ Uiagalelei and Trevor Lawrence, as a for instance, year between Spencer Rattler and Caleb Williams, as a for instance. And those are just examples that I'm signing off the top of my head. Do you believe, if we research this, and admittedly I have not, but if we research this, is Georgia more aggressive at stacking quarterbacks in consecutive years than other programs are?
No, you can see Ohio State tries to do this. Ohio State, brought in CJ Stroud and Jack Miller the same year. They've brought in, and I can only look at about 3 or 4 programs when I think about what's apples to apples with Georgia.
But Stroud and Miller aren't the same kind of prospect we're talking about here, though, to be fair, though, right?
They're different, but they're still, top Elite 11 type quarterbacks that they bring in. I think the thing that, let me take on one thing I heard out of Mike. I think that the other point that's different here, it's funny how both of these guys are sons of fathers with a defensive background, defensive secondary, defensive coordinator. It's also both ironic that both of them are in-state prospects who initially committed out of state, and maybe they pre-portaled themselves by saying, that wild blue yonder there isn't really exactly what I thought it would be. So let me come back home to maybe this stable aspect of Georgia. I think those are things that are different, especially that coaching aspect, because they come from areas where they're sons of coaches. And when you're not playing right away, you don't go transfer to another high school. And I think these guys are hardwired to look at it and say, that just means I got to work on me, or that just means like I know, like if we had Greg Vandagriff on the show right now in one of these boxes right now, I know Greg would sit there and say, hey man, it's their job. It's their job to bring guys that are as good as Brock or surround Brock with a lot of good talent. I think, quarterback's different, but the one thing they want to be sure of, and this is for the Georgia folks out there, nobody wants you to go to a redshirt freshman with 0 starts. Nobody wants to see the graduate transfer, incumbent transfer out. Nobody wants to see the 5-star incoming transfer not be able to go until week 6 or 7 of the season. Nobody wants to be forced to go to number 3 or number 4 down the depth chart. These are all insurance policies to work against that. And, I know quarterback's different, but I don't think any of these fathers and their sons, they go into Georgia realizing that, hey, they're really supposed to find somebody better than you. And Brendan, I thought the culture of quarterbacks is really funny because on our show, when people still should be dancing the jig and be giving a Tiger Woods fist pump on your special broadcast today, you got folks on the Dog Nation feed, Brandon, they're your people. They're top fans. You got to love them. But they're like, how does this affect us with Arch Manning in the 2023 class? They're already worried about that. And I mean, that's just hysterical about what quarterback life really actually is.
So let's do this really quick since Mike brought it up, and I think it's a point worth bringing up. And I think Hugh Nash in our Facebook comment section said something pretty telling here, is that I don't personally feel like I've heard a lot about Carson Beck in his year on campus thus far at Georgia. And if for no other reason than Stockton and Vandagriff are higher rated recruits, my assumption is they would be slotted ahead of Beck for eventual playing time. So I really don't know where this leaves Carson Beck. Mike, since you brought it up, I'll let you answer it first. Where do you think it leaves Carson Beck?
I think it leaves them all in the same place. I think it leaves him with the challenge of showing what he can do this spring. I think it sorts itself out on the field, and Beck has an opportunity. He didn't have spring football last year. He was getting, I believe, second team reps maybe in fall drills. I know there was one scrimmage Aaron Murray thought that he looked better than the other quarterbacks. So I don't know what that says for Carson. He didn't have many opportunities this year. Carson had the opportunity to leave when Jamie Newman transferred in and JT Daniels transferred in and Stetson Bennett was elevated over him as quarterback and Dwan Mathis got the start. I mean, Carson Beck has had a lot of chances to give up on Georgia and leave the program, and he hasn't yet. So, my thinking at this point where he's already enrolled in spring classes is that he's going to see spring drills through and see where it's at. Let's see how he catches on. Let's see how much does he improve. Let's see what sort of feedback do the Georgia coaches give him. The fact that Todd Monken and Kirby Smart were invested enough in Gunnar Stockton to get a commitment. I don't know that reflects anything on Carson Beck. It's their job to try and recruit the best players. So in my opinion, and Jeff may be closer to it than I, but in my opinion, Carson Beck goes and plays this spring and sees how it shakes out.
Anthony Spano says, I'm not letting Connor talk enough. So by all means, let me make sure I do that. Connor, what do you think about Carson Beck? As I said before, I haven't heard very much about him this year. I really don't know where all of this stands with him.
Well, I don't want to compare him directly to this guy, but you know what hometown Carson is from?
Jacksonville.
Anyone?
Jacksonville?
Yes, that is correct. There was a national championship winning quarterback this year from that same hometown who was not the highest rated recruit. I believe he was Matt Jones was around the 300 range. Carson Beck came in that 200, 300 range as well. And everyone this offseason, including myself and BA and I had talked about it on the show, the potential of Bryce Young coming in there and winning that job at Alabama. And the reality is that didn't happen. Matt Jones did what he needed to do. He took care of business beforehand, before Young had even gotten to campus, and done enough to show that he could be the quarterback for that team. And once he was given that chance, he never really let up and ultimately went on to win a national championship. I think he's going to be a first-round pick, a top 15 pick at worst this year. So while, yes, he doesn't have the recruiting flavor or sizzle that some of these other guys do, as long as he's at Georgia and competing there, he's going to have a chance to win this job. And if he goes out and does that, quite frankly, I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest.
So, Jeff, the Beck situation pretty well. Do you think he could ever be convinced to be as patient as Mac Jones did at Alabama? Because the one point that you got to add to the Jones situation this year is that was a class of 2017 signee who had waited around until 2020 to kind of get his chance. His patience was rewarded. You don't see a lot of patience among quarterbacks right now. You think Carson's willing to be patient at Georgia for a few years?
I think what's going to happen there, Brandon, is he's going to see where he's at after spring practice. I think if he's running as the number 2 and getting a lot of number 2 reps behind JT, I think Georgia's gonna maybe fulfill some patience in him right there with like, hey, maybe this is my thing. Maybe this is a chance where I want to see this thing out. I do think Georgia feels like he is a great quarterback and he has a great future. But I think the thing here, which is, I guess, the all-encompassing statement is, Brandon, when Aaron Murray's at practice and he's tweeting out things that Kirby Smart doesn't want him to say, it becomes much harder for him to look at a pecking order that includes a Vandagriff and a Stockton and a Beck, let's say, and figure out who had the best scrimmage that time. I think there's going to be a lot of big-time arms and a lot of big-time players when you think about Georgia's 1 through 4. It somehow just got a lot better over the course of a couple of cycles.
So, Connor, let me give you the last word on this, because other than Aaron Murray's unsanctioned, statement from practice, we didn't hear much from Beck this year. And it's important to note that when Jalen Carter had a highlight play during a practice, magically somehow that video found its way on the internet. And the year before that, when George Pickens made a highlight catch during practice, magically somehow that video made its way on the internet. Somehow we have a way of finding out when freshman players at Georgia do something really spectacular during practice. Some of this stuff, someone magically it makes its way to the internet somehow. Boy, it was kind of quiet on the Beck front. Does that mean anything to you?
No, because if I'm remembering the Jalen Carter thing, I believe Jalen Carter himself put that online and then somebody screen grabbed it from him. So, just because there's not a lot of noise doesn't mean that he's not out there. I think one interesting thing to end this on is Stetson Bennett's still there. And, I know not everyone is in love with him, but that's a quality backup to have, and a guy that's beaten Auburn and Tennessee, gone on the road against Arkansas and Kentucky, and played at Alabama as well. So I think it's going to be a really fascinating look at what Georgia does as its backup quarterback situation in 2021.
The troll in me would love nothing more than to see Stetson jog out there first play against Clemson and just get the comment sections all riled up. But I obviously say that in jest. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is Cover4 Live. Connor Riley, you just heard from Mike Griffith, Jeff SENTELL on hand with us as well. Your comments coming up before we're done. Also, a lot else to talk about here today, including Georgia hiring a coach here this week, too. Huge news on that front, as Georgia has added Jamal Adai, and I'll give Mike some credit here on that for helping me with the pronunciation on that. The one thing I do know, even if the pronunciation is a little difficult to pull off, certainly what Adai did last year with the West Virginia defense is much ballyhooed after a weird scenario that kind of led to a defensive coordinator departure, and coaching responsibilities were kind of divvied up after that. West Virginia really got it done, especially through the air. Fewest passing yards per game allowed in the entire country in a league, the Big 12, that's not known for great pass defense, typically speaking. Mike, I'm not going to lie to you, 72 hours ago, I'd never really heard of Jamal Adai. Once the online chatter started picking up around him, you do some research on him, you realize that this is a pretty sharp guy. He has a very easy way of articulating what he wants from defensive back play. A couple press conferences on YouTube indicate that. The results on the field, as I said before, seem to be a validation of him as a coach. I really like the hire, Mike. What did you make of it?
Yeah, well, Kirby Smart's ready to live and die with Jamal Adai. I had a chance to talk with Butch Jones, who actually hired Jamal back at Cincinnati. He gave him his first full-time coaching job. Jamal had been working as a defensive assistant at the University of Michigan, a graduate assistant. And Butch had seen Jamal back when he was a player with West Virginia. And you were right, BA. You actually made the reference right away when you found out his playing dates. He did indeed play against Georgia. Not only did he play against Georgia, he forced a fumble on Danny Ware in the red zone with the Dogs trailing 14-0 in the first quarter. He was a big-time player. I mean, you go back and look at his stats, and this is a guy that was regular. Like every other game, he had double-digit tackles. 12, 14, 11, 16. I mean, a 3-year starter, an all-conference player, much like Kirby Smart. Interestingly enough, when Butch Jones hired him, he didn't have a defensive position, so he hired him as a running backs coach. Well, that's similar to what Mark Richt did with Kirby Smart in 2005 when Mark hired Kirby Smart and put him as a running backs coach for a year. And then he went back to his alma mater and he coached. And I think, he probably, did about as good at West Virginia as he could have done. And, Butch just told me that this is a guy who's a great communicator, who's got a great family. He stressed the character and said that this is a guy that sets a tone. And, when I think about what Georgia needed for this position group, it wasn't a big name guy that coached in the NFL. It wasn't Will Muschamp and, an older guy out there, trying to keep – it was somebody younger that could relate to the players, that was a little bit more of a player's coach. I mean, let's be honest. Kirby Smart is a very fiery guy. Connor's been out there and seen those practices with me. And you kind of need a yin to the yang, right? You kind of need the good cop, bad cop. And, I think that Adai is a guy that can really relate to these players in addition to developing them, Brandon.
So two things. First of all, the correct pun usage you were looking for is Georgia's looking to build a diehard defense. That's the correct pun usage that you're looking for. The second thing is this, and this is on a more serious note. Did you get from your reporting the idea that Adai might be a player-friendly coach? Because I'm not saying that his press conference make him seem like the hardest dude in the world, but I didn't get a lot of touchy-feely from him in the press conference videos that I watch. He kind of comes across as a pretty no-nonsense guy to me. Not saying, cracking whips at Georgia or anything like that, but I mean, he has a little bit of an edge about him in the way that he talks about what he's looking to see from his defensive backs. I don't get the sense that he's looking for divas back there in that defensive back room.
Yeah, well, they need whatever they can get in that defensive back room. They've had 9 scholarship guys leave the program since the end of the 2019 season, and 4 of them have been transferred, albeit the last one was Prather Hudson. That still counts, right? You had 4 transfers out. But the point of the matter is I think this is a guy who relates well to players. And when I talked to Butch, now, believe it or not, he's back at being a head coach again. He was really excited. And obviously Butch knows Georgia well from being on that Alabama staff the last 3 years. And he feels like this was just a perfect hire for what Georgia needs. And Alabama knows Georgia as well. Even though they act like they're arrogant and nobody can touch them, you better believe they've got their antennas up and they know what's going on in that Georgia roster, just like Georgia fans are always spying what's happening at Alabama.
Jeff, what'd you think of the hire?
I like it. He's got a good track record. He's got the stats that matter. He's worked in a lot of places. He's faced some of more of those spread type offenses. For me, you got to check 3 boxes. You got to be smart enough to lead the room. You got to be a great recruiter. You got to be able to teach and coach your guys and get them all schemed up and get the knowledge in their head where they can play fast. Georgia's defensive system, which is the architect of Kirby Smart's defense, a lot of checks. I think the defensive backs have the hardest responsibilities outside the quarterback of anybody in the program about what they have to do pre-snap, post-snap, all the adjustments, all the checks. Main thing, you got to connect with the guys in the room. They've got to get developed and go to the NFL. I think what this hire does for Georgia is you get a guy potentially that has the ability to check all those boxes. When even a guy like the great Charlton Warren, I don't know if he was all those things at all those times at Georgia.
How about Jeff, the newly minted 5-star on the 24/7 Sports ranking, Terry and Arnold? Boy, those uncommitted guys seem to climb that ranking there late in the process. But nonetheless, how do you think Arnold views all of this?
Arnold's really basing the geometry here for his decision on the head man, which is Kirby Smart. I think whoever his position coach is not as vital as the receivers he would go against in practice, the opportunity to play early, the opportunity to win. One thing that Terrion Arnold has learned in high school, being on a team of about 25 to 28 players and very few seniors, is I don't care how many 5-stars you have or how many plays you make on the other side of the ball, you need some more players around you. He was making 10, 11, 12 tackles a game against good teams. And Brandon, when you play safety and you play way back there, that is not a very good thing. So I think Terrion wants to be at a spot where you can win. Georgia can do that. Kirby Smart's not going anywhere. I think the major things with Terrion Arnold are not going to be too worrisome about the defensive backs hire. Although, Brandon, you can bet that fancy new headset you got there that a Zoom meeting. I tell you what, I think Terrion Arnold's going to talk to the new defensive backs coach at Georgia about 19 times before any beat writer at the University of Georgia does. I'll tell you that. Terrion Arnold already knows a whole lot about him.
Connor, what did you think of the Adai hire?
Yeah, I think it's one that, you know that he's a younger coach, that he's a guy who this is by far, I think, the biggest job that he's had so far. It's a job that he's going to really develop into. I think you look at a guy like Charlton Warren, he had coached in Tennessee, he had coached in Florida. He's probably a guy who correctly is going to end up taking a defensive coordinator job sooner rather than later. With a guy like Adai, This is a job I feel like he can really develop into, because that's what he's going to have to do with this defensive back room this year. The big challenge for him right away. I don't know how successful this defensive backfield is going to be in week one. I think it's pretty clearly one of the two bigger weaknesses on the team. But it's a position where sort of you see like a guy like a Del McGee, or even on defense, a guy like a Glenn Schumann, who comes in as a young guy, develops over time, and then you get him in there year 5, year 6. He's one of the best position coaches in the country at what he does. And I think that Addae has the potential to develop into sort of a Glenn Schumann type figure, where at year 5, year 6, you're like, how is Georgia still holding on to this guy? He's pretty clearly one of the better defensive minds, an excellent recruiter, and someone that clearly relates very well to players.
So, Mike, one more point on this. Connor says it'll be the biggest job that Addae has had, and I believe that's obviously factually true. But you can make a case, though, I believe, that Addae will actually have fewer coaching responsibilities at Georgia in 2021 than he had at West Virginia in 2020 because of the weird scenario that led to the departure of Vic Croning and the fact that Neil Brown didn't replace his defensive coordinator there. I'm not saying that Addae was the full-on defensive coordinator, but I think he was taking on more responsibilities than a typical defensive backs coach would have. So, I would say, in at least my understanding from a long way away from Morgantown, West Virginia, is it sounds like Addae did a pretty good bit of coaching last year.
Well, he did. I would just say that with the number of new players, the influx of young talent that Georgia has, I mean, you look at Keely Ringo, as talented as he is, he needs to get coached up. And I'll digress for a moment. There was something that happened at the Senior Bowl today that I thought was very telling. And I don't know if you got to see the video of it, Brandon, but Matt Rule really lit into his team and told his guys, hey, we're trying to coach you up. Don't just say yes, sir. Look us in the eyes. You need to understand we're constantly, and that's a group of the best seniors that are still being coached up. I think sometimes when we look at guys like Keely Ringo, we go, oh, wow, he's a 5-star, plug him in and play, or Terry and Arnold, just get him out there. There's going to be some coaching. And I think that's where Addae is so important. And to Jeff's point about Mr. Intensity, Charlton Warren, Charlton, played at the Air Force and carried himself with a lot of discipline. And talking to people that know, this is a guy that didn't allow for much margin for error. And Connor might have been there. I can't remember if him and I talked about it, but there was one day that Tyreek Stevenson wasn't giving a full effort in drill work. And Charlton said, and he wasn't the guy getting coached up. He was playing the other role, right? There's always two guys that go against each other, the live human tackling dummy that they work against. And he wasn't given the right effort. And Warren said, you're not giving me your best, number 7 or whatever it was, and kicked him out of the drill. And I'm not saying that, that Addae's not going to do that he's going to hold hands and say, here's a lollipop, let's try it again. But I am saying that I think he's going to have a different kind of relationship, like Connor alluded to. And I think you've got to be able to be that guy that the players, what do they say? They don't care how much you know till they know how much you care. I think he need to be that guy that wins them over. And I thought Connor made a great analogy with Glenn Schumann. Those players love Glenn Schumann. And I think Jamal has a chance to be that guy.
Let me move on to the next topic. 2021 schedule was also released yesterday. And here's my basic takeaway on this. I think when you see the dates laid out for the games, obviously it reinforces how important Clemson's going to be and how important Florida is going to be, those two almost bookend style games. But in between that, Georgia faces a group of 5 team, 3 programs breaking in new coaches, 2 teams that Georgia easily beat on the road a year ago. Jeff, Georgia was already, I believe, a shortlist national championship contender even prior to this week, but the release of the 2021 schedule, I think, validates that point even more. I'm not saying it's the easiest schedule in the country, and obviously, the Clemson game no easier to win because of the rest of the schedule, but if you can get past Clemson week 1, the notion that Georgia could very easily be undefeated playing Florida, sporting a very high ranking to go along with that, and frankly, no grizzly bear really coming after the Gators either. This is the kind of schedule that can produce a national champion, or at the very least, college football playoff team.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. The professor, Mike Griffith, was looking at things about bye weeks and people who had a week off in front of Georgia. Curious to see how he articulates how he feels about this schedule. I also, what I saw when I saw that schedule, I thought what I think would probably be, people will chuckle when they call UAB a trap game, but I think that UAB game is very interesting after Clemson, especially if Georgia gets it done against Clemson. I think that's a program that, man, UAB has put together some impressive things. I think Bill Clark's one of the best defensive minds in college football, but I think the point there is salient in terms of there's not a lot there after you get by Clemson. I think there'll be a down Florida team. I think Auburn will be Auburn. Tennessee, man, will they have 60 players left on scholarship? I don't know. I think really Georgia's schedule is going to be weird because they could be an unbeaten team in the SEC, regardless of what happens against Clemson. And if they put on a slobber knocker of a fight against Clemson, I think they're very likely to advance pretty long way, especially with what they're going to progress in the passing game. Lots of guys are coming back for their senior and junior years. I mean, Georgia's had some returning firepower teams, but this team right here all the way around seems like it's pretty stocked in all the areas for that maybe next year type of run for the Georgia Bulldogs.
Mike, what did you think of the Georgia schedule?
Wow, amazingly fair. A couple years ago, there were 5 teams that had bye weeks before they played Georgia. Last year, it was a front-loaded schedule. Florida and Alabama didn't have back-to-back road games. Georgia only played 3 home games last year. The only people that have a complaint are the people that buy season tickets at Georgia that just keep getting punished for these Sanford Stadium games. I mean, my goodness, just give your tickets away to Charleston Southern. Maybe we ought to have Connor suit up and do a first person. He can start at quarterback and they would beat Charleston Southern. I mean, what a horrible, horrendous football team. They lost 72-10 to South Carolina 2 years ago. They've got to play a 4-game schedule. Kennesaw State is their opener, just to give you some perspective. It's really embarrassing. Maybe they'll make the Georgia players run backwards or do somersaults or something fun in the fourth quarter. Let the fans get involved. I don't know. But the home schedule is very weak. You look at South Carolina as a home game, Arkansas as a home game, Missouri's a home game, Charleston Southern. But to your point, the one thing you said I'd agree with about the schedule, BA, is that it does indeed make for a championship run. And what I cannot help but find some irony in here, was I think it was a week or 2 ago, you said you weren't going to get caught up in the hype. But now you're seeing this schedule, and it's really hard not to say, these guys really might win a championship.
Yes, that's certainly a fair point. So I want to make sure I respond to that appropriately, that I'm not saying the schedule means they're going to win the title, but there's nothing about the schedule that would make you say they're not going to win it. Clemson's obviously
right. And if you can't do it with this schedule,
yeah,
right. I mean, Georgia couldn't have asked for a better schedule. That's my answer.
Yeah, I totally agree. Clemson is as tough as it gets week 1, but you got to play somebody, and you're going to have to validate yourself in some kind of game. Might as well be Clemson. After that, I think it's very, very reasonable. I also think you bring up a pretty good point, and I hadn't probably given this as much consideration as I should. There's not a lot of doozies for Georgia fans at home this year. That's a tough situation with welcoming back of the group of 5 teams, and in some cases lower than that. Not a very good-looking home schedule. I know that'll be disappointing for a lot of fans. I'm not really quite sure what Georgia was supposed to do about it, but we are kind of back to the days of unpleasant non-conference games like UAB and certainly Charleston Southern for sure. Connor, your thoughts?
Yeah, it sucks that they have to play an FCS team, especially at the end of the season, But I will say, you look at the end of the season there, let's say they do win all their SEC games, which I think they're going to end up doing. Their last 2 weeks are against Charleston Southern and Georgia Tech. Now, as long as George Pickens doesn't get ejected for fighting again, that sets up to a pretty nice roadway to that SEC championship game, because I still don't think Georgia Tech is all that good. I think Jeff Collins is pretty similar to Jeremy Pruitt in terms of coaching ability there. So it sort of sets up for a nice little run there. And if I could put on my Mike Griffith tinfoil hat here, Georgia only has one opponent that has a bye week before it plays it. That's Florida, and Georgia obviously also has a bye week before playing Florida. Alabama has to do that 3 times. They had 3 opponents that have a bye week before playing them. They're the only team in the league that has that many byes before playing them. So if there were, like you guys have said, if there's ever a schedule for Georgia to get up and get it done, it's this year with this schedule.
So let me ask this real quickly before we change the subject. Is there any game that's not on the radar that should be? I made a little bit of a case the other day for Missouri the week after Florida, even though Georgia won easily at Columbia a year ago. Missouri scored 40 points 3 times in 2020. Surprisingly won 5 games. Probably a better team than people thought it was going to be. Try to make a little bit of a case for Missouri. Is there any game that's kind of maybe surprisingly tougher than right now it appears to be? Connor, you can go first.
Yeah, I'll go Kentucky. I know they don't have Mike's favorite punching bag, Eddie Grant, anymore, but Georgia 2 years ago when they played them in Sanford Stadium, they only scored 21 points. Last year they played them up in Lexington. They only scored 14. This defense has done a really good job against this Georgia offense. They bring back a lot of talent. Obviously, they're still trying to figure out the quarterback position. But I think this Kentucky team sort of knows how to hang with and throw punches with Georgia, and I would expect they're going to do that again this year at home in Sanford Stadium.
Mike, you got a game?
Yeah, Kentucky scored, Eddie Grant put 3 points on the board in the last 2 games. One of them was a torrential rain for. But Connor's right. Kentucky's physical.
Boy, it seems like Kentucky's played a lot of rain games lately.
I worry about Auburn. I think the Brian Harsin hire is sneaky good. Derek Mason beat Kirby Smart. Mike Bobo probably gave Kirby Smart the playbook and works with him a minute when him and Will Muschamp get together to play poker these days. So, Auburn to me, and who knows, maybe Bo Nix has his legacy game. I mean, he did beat a pretty good Oregon team as a true freshman. I haven't heard the latest on Tank. Are Tank's treads still on the plains, Jeff? I guess I'll just transition into you. Auburn's my game. If you don't know, I'm gonna hand off to SENTELL here, BA.
Yeah,
is Tank's tread still on the plains?
Tank is coming back. He has said that. Jeff, go ahead.
So I'm going to get out of character here a little bit. I got a kind of a devilish, sneaky guy comment right here. I don't want to say dangerous game. I'm going to say most tantalizing game. For me, one of the things that needs to be said about this 2021 Georgia schedule is I think this is the most eagerly anticipated Georgia-Vanderbilt matchup of all time.
Yeah.
I'm guessing that everybody's going to say Clemson. Everybody's going to say Florida. But for me, the number three game for me where I'm going to go into that thinking, like a little bit of fear factor, a little bit of what's going to happen here. But that might be the game Georgia puts a 65 burger up on Vanderbilt. And I think most people on this feed and even this esteemed panel would say maybe Vanderbilt had that coming.
I think you're exactly right about that, Jeff. That's a good point.
I would say that Jeff is also looking to the Vanderbilt game because it's at Nashville this year.
Always a fun thing, too. Hopefully the world's a little more back.
We need that. We need a Nashville road trip with a Charlotte road trip and a Jacksonville road trip. We need all of those happening in the same calendar year.
I like the idea of that. Mike, let me say one more thing about the Auburn game, and then we'll get ready to move on here. But I think the Georgia-Auburn game on October 9th is very interesting for this reason. Auburn has 2 incredibly tough road games prior to playing Georgia on October 9th, not in consecutive weeks, but Auburn has to go to Penn State, has to go to LSU, a place that Auburn hasn't won since 1999. There's a really good chance that Auburn has already lost twice by the time Georgia comes a-calling. Georgia has beaten Auburn with regularity now for more than a decade. That game could be very interesting from the standpoint of Auburn fans may have already checked on in the season by October 9th, and Georgia may have a chance, much the same way they kind of give them a black eye in recruiting today, to really give the start of the Brian Harsin era a real kick in the gut. If you could give them 3 losses by October 9th, Brian Harsin is going to be looking back to the Smurf turf and wishing he was still in Boise.
Or the flip side is, and I don't think much of Penn State these days, to be honest with you. They had some really bad losses last year. So I think that's an Auburn win. I'm going to call that one right now. But what if Auburn's off to a good start? I mean, this could absolutely – I was covering the Terry Bowden era. Kerry won his first 19 games. And if they come through, marching through and are able to beat Georgia in Jordan-Hare Stadium, maybe JT Daniels, has a bad day, or Stetson Bennett looks good in practice that week and Kirby wants to give him some reps. Who's to say that, that's not a game that Georgia could trip up? So I'm serious about Auburn. I think Brian Harsin is a very, very good coach. That offensive line is going to be much, much better than it was a year ago. And to me, that's just the game that's the game if there's a trip up for me. I see it the other way, BA. I think it's dangerous, and I think there's a better chance that Auburn's undefeated rolling in there than them having 2 losses.
Mike, let's educate young Connor on something that happened way before he's born. Do you remember what the 1993 Auburn Tigers nickname was, since you bring up the start of the Terry Bowden era? Do you remember what their nickname was? They were the best team.
Do I remember what?
Yeah, they were the best team on the radio because
they couldn't play on TV.
Because they
the
weren't
best team you never saw.
Yeah, they weren't allowed to play. They weren't allowed to play games on TV because of NCAA sanctions. And true enough, I remember the sporting goods store had the T-shirt with the scores, best team on the radio. It's set on the back. Always keeping it classy in the SEC. You certainly can appreciate that. All right, speaking of keeping it classy, let's move on to our fourth topic here for a moment. Jamie Newman, speaking at the Senior Bowl here today, according to reports from those in Mobile, said that he's already spoken to all 32 NFL teams. They've asked him why it was that he opted out of the season, and he cited the coronavirus case that a family member of his dealt with as kind of, the reason why he chose to opt out at UGA. Connor, what do you make of that?
I certainly understand that. I can understand this disease scaring some people and allowing them to readjust and refocus their priorities and focusing on things. I think Jamie had always came to the plan with that he was only going to be at Georgia for one season. And so he felt that, hey, I'm going to count for myself and myself only and opt out here. And I know a lot of Georgia fans are upset by this, but at the end of the day, I think Jamie earned the right to make that own decision for himself and do what was in his best interest. Obviously, I don't think it was in the best interest for the Georgia team this year, but at the end of the day, we're all individuals here and we have to take care of ourselves and our families. And I can certainly understand Jamie making that decision.
Jeff, Newman's not a guy I'll root for or even wish well, but I'm not going to fault him for his reasoning here on this. What did you make of it?
I think Connor covered it perfectly. I think that sentiment that was expressed here, I mean, folks, football's a hard game. And, maybe whether it was a combination of COVID or worries long-term or family member or whether or not he was digging the offense with those Zoom meetings and everything that went back and forth with Monken, he definitely took a road not taken in order to bet on himself and pull all the way out. And and he would basically base his NFL draft stock on some Wake Forest pro day workouts, because we certainly don't think he'll be in Athens for his pro day at Georgia. You got to think that he's really basing most of his professional entry point, launching point future on this week in Mobile for the Senior Bowl. One thing I'm wanting to see, everybody swaps their logos for the Senior Bowl for the game. Like you'll see this guy with like an Auburn and a BYU and a Georgia or whatever.
I know he's really disconcerting to me to see that. Always kind of throws me for a loop.
I know. And remember the blue-gray game that used to be on Christmas, and you'd see all that stuff from Montgomery. But I know the Senior Bowl folks. I know Mike's guy, Jim Nagy, who's got him with some gear here that he's sporting today, representing Reese's. I'm sure Mike's got a case of Reese's peanut butter cups hiding behind that ceramic dog over his shoulder. But I'm going to say this. They won't let him wear the Georgia helmet, but wouldn't it be funny if a Georgia G shows up in the wrong place backwards or something like that on that helmet?
No.
Some poets like Mike Griffith, who like to write, would probably say that was apropos and a fitting metaphor that the G is turned in the wrong direction on Jamie Newman's helmet.
Mike, I think it's certainly inappropriate for Georgia fans to trash Newman on social media. I think that kind of stuff's gross pretty well across the board. But the idea that everybody's got to be best friends, I think, is also overblown here too. Newman made the decision that he made. That's fine. It's in his best interest. But if Newman's best interest doesn't benefit Georgia fans aren't under any obligation to root for him, cheer for him, wish him well, or anything like that. So, football is a big boy sport, and, not everybody has to like each other. Georgia fans, I don't believe, like Jamie Newman. I don't think Georgia fans have to apologize for that.
I don't think they ever really knew Jamie Newman, but they never really had a chance to say hello, Newman.
But do you realize, though, Mike, hold on, but I'll let you finish your point. Do you realize that this time a year ago, he was 7-1 to win the Heisman Trophy? 7-1. It's the entire phenomenon of this should be its own 30 for 30 in that all of this was just kind of cooked out of complete thin air. But go ahead.
It was out of being the Georgia quarterback. It says everything about why Kirby Smart keeps landing 5 stars, because the reality of it is that Jamie Newman probably wasn't going to win the starting job. And I think we all make decisions daily based on risk reward. And I have no doubt that the COVID-19 virus played a role in Jamie's decision. But had Kirby Smart named him the starting quarterback by then, I don't think he would have left. I think that part of it was the writing was on the wall. At that time, Kirby was operating under the assumption that JT Daniels would be ready for the opener, and Jamie Newman and JT Daniels were splitting the first team reps. And so that's where Georgia was with it. I mean, Jamie Newman had been on campus for 8 months, and they still hadn't named him the starter. They hadn't given him any reason to believe he was going to start. I don't think it's a coincidence that Jamie Newman went to Kirby Smart's office on Tuesday after the first scrimmage, a non-practice day, and had a talk with the head coach. And then he didn't announce it until the next day. It was very amicable parting. But the reality was Jamie Newman was not going to be the starting quarterback in Todd Monken's system. Had he been named the starter, I do believe he would have stayed. So I think Georgia fans should cut this guy a break. He could have chose any school to go to and play, and he rolled the dice on the Georgia Bulldogs. COVID happened, and he wasn't able to learn the offense, and Georgia was able to get a better quarterback to transfer in, and he lost. And he could just, as we sat here, it's almost come full circle. We talked at the beginning about, Gunnar Stockton following up Brock Vandagriff. Well, how about JT Daniel following up Jamie Newman? I guarantee you that when Jamie Newman transferred to Georgia in January, he did not think that Georgia would bringing in a 5-star transfer in the month of May and June.
Yeah, I still don't quite think the timeline is never really quite lined up for me as well as it seems to for you. But nonetheless, you've been very consistent on your opinion about that the entire time. I'll certainly give you that. Jeff, it sounds like you want to jump in.
Yeah, Mike, I got a take on something. Maybe you haven't fielded this question before in your many programs. What do you think happens if Jamie Newman gets a legit actual spring practice, a G day? He gets in the crowd. He puts up 2 touchdowns. He throws a couple touchdowns to Pickens. That is before Pickens gets his fake injury by conjured up by a beat writer. But what do you think the best possible G-Day experience does for Jamie Newman sticking things out? Might have solidified a starting job with some good on-field work in that game.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the first strike for Jamie came over Zoom when there was a disconnect with Todd Monken over the summer. He'd lost some trust with the disconnect over Zoom, and how the details worked out. I've heard the story from 2 or 3 different people, but Monken's not a guy that plays around, and I don't know if Jamie was ready for the intensity that a school like Georgia brings. It's not Wake Forest, right? So I think that what you're basically suggesting is, had Jamie had spring football, would he still be here, or could he have been the guy last season? I think absolutely. I think had he had the opportunity, to get comfortable with Monken's system, or had Monken had the opportunity to see what Jamie could do and work a system around him, because what Dwan Mathis and Jamie Newman were working on in the offseason, and I don't mind telling you this, I've spoken with the Mathis family since they left. I have a pretty good, clear idea what happened. But the offense they were working on in the very beginning, before all this COVID stuff came down, is not the same offense that JT Daniels was running at the end of the season. That doesn't surprise you. Coaches have a tendency to build a scheme around the players. And because they hadn't had a chance to invest that much into Newman, and they did have a chance once JT Daniels was on hand to build this air raid concept offense, I think that was a game changer for Jamie. And BAS for the timeline, the reason I'm consistent with it is I actually went back again recently and looked at Kirby Smart's comments and quotes and some of the video. And he said that he was under the assumption after scrimmage 1 that JT Daniels was going to be prepared for the opener. And he said who was running first team and second team and third team. So, I go back over that again and again. Connor and I do so much work on this and so many videos and so many stories, and people, that's why when you read our stories, those links are in there so that if you want to have your own historical reference to kind of get an idea how it was, those links are right there to tell you the story. So that's why the timeline lays out so consistently, talking with Quincy Avery before, during, and then again last week, talking with Coach Timmons, his high school coach. These are the people that had been around Jamie, talking with the Mathis family and what did they observe and what were their thoughts on it. Nothing went wrong. Nobody did anything bad. It was just, this is how the circumstances shook out.
So let me just say one thing in response to that. We'll get ready to take a couple comments and wrap up. And I only want to say this in fairness to Newman, that whatever may have happened in the original scrimmages, I can't really speak to that, but I have certainly talked to plenty of people who were at the third scrimmage, and Daniels barely played. And if memory serves, this is 2 weeks before the start of the season. So, and that's also 3 days after Newman had opted out. So by that point in time, they knew Daniels wasn't healthy. And they were still trying to act like there was some sort of competition going on between Daniels and Newman for that starting job, even though they had to have been aware that Daniels wasn't healthy because they didn't play him in real situations in the third scrimmage. That's the part of that that's always pretty weird to me, but go ahead.
He left after the first scrimmage. He wasn't there for scrimmage 2 or scrimmage 3.
Okay,
Jamie Newman was only in one scrimmage.
Then maybe I'm all Are you sure he didn't leave right before
Yep.
the third scrimmage, or maybe I'm wrong?
It was after the first.
Yeah,
it was
he left
after the very
first scrimmage.
Okay, well then I'll take the L on that one then. Let's move on here to our from our cover 4 to our cover more, and take a few questions and comments on the way out the door here. Give folks a chance to weigh in with their own thoughts on what's going on with Georgia football.
But BA, just so you know, you were correct that they did know something was wrong by scrimmage 3. You were absolutely correct about that.
Yeah, that's the one thing I will stand beside, is that I had plenty of people tell me that Daniels did barely play in that scrimmage, but it's all water under the bridge now, I guess. G Grace Bama Boy over here on YouTube is, by the way, taking a shot at me on the YouTube page a minute ago. Don't think I didn't see that, Grace. Said that that Kirby's copying us.
What did he say? What did he say? Now I'm curious.
Oh, okay. So if you want to really get into it, he said that I haven't been good at picking teams. I'll have G Grace know this.
Oh, no.
I've picked the winner of the SEC West 4 years in a row. And Alabama's only won the West in 2 of those 4 years. I nailed Auburn in 17. I nailed LSU in 19. I got Alabama in intervening years. Not only did I pick Bama this year, I called Texas A&M as being a one-loss team. So G Grace can take that junk back to Tuscaloosa and eat it. Archibald's barbecue with that if he wants to. Because,
hey, Brandon, who's winning it in 2021? Are all the precincts in yet? Who's winning the West in 2021?
I'm not going to get drawn off sides with an early prediction. Plus, I got to drag this content out over the course of the next few months. The point is G. Grace says that Georgia's copying Alabama by putting in a barbershop. I actually don't know that Georgia's really putting in a barbershop. I think that was just part of a video for Xavier and Sorry. Georgia's not really putting in a barbershop, are they? That's just a fiction,
Oregon
right?
has a barbershop. Every school in the country has a barbershop.
Well, they're having a barbershop.
Technically, if you've got a chair and a clipper, that is, at that point in time, basically a barbershop as it is. By the way,
I've got a barbershop in my apartment. We cut my roommate's hair last week.
By the way, somebody, I think it was Richard Sheffield in the Facebook comment section, Connor says you're going to go with the JT Daniels look, except instead of like it's almost like you need the mustache to go along with the hair. You get a little bit of a Daniels look.
Yeah, see, I know I can't grow that mustache, so I give JT credit for it. Though, interestingly enough, we didn't see that mustache when he was playing this season, so I know I can't grow that mustache, so there's no point in trying it there. And I haven't gotten a haircut since last February, so I'm just committed to the bit now.
Chris, I like to hear. I think it looks good, actually. Chris West mentioning Will Muschamp as possible factor in Gunnar Stockton's recruitment. I don't know about that, but I'm going to give a shout out to our buddy Chip Towers after the controversy involving Will Muschamp. Chip came firing back with receipts this week. The picture of Will Muschamp in Athens. I know this is inside baseball. People don't care about what media people do. I do realize that. But Jeff, I was pretty impressed with Chip coming back with some receipts on the whole Will Muschamp thing.
I mean, Chip Towers, the dean of the Georgia recruiting beat, he's basically teaching a class on shoe leather journalism right there. I mean, I heard he had the Towers mobile and he was incognito mode and he was staking out some things. I think he could get a Dunkin' Donuts sponsorship or something out of that thing, man. With Mr. Towers, staking out a story.
And by the way, the technician that I guess shared that photo, a very frequent Facebook commenter of ours as well.
Yeah, the thing you want to know is
go ahead, Jeff.
I think the thing you want to know is, I'm sure Muschamp, did he get the high-speed internet for those Zoom conferencings that he would be doing for all those meetings and that analyst and tape breakdown in Athens?
Well, Jeff, you certainly could have given him some advice on the high-speed internet that he would need to handle those kind of calls.
Hey, man, I'm going to sound like Brandon right here, pushing back on that. My internet speed is flawless now. I've got a Thunderbolt connector. It's kind of like Georgia's quarterback position, you guys. Over the last 4 or 5 weeks, I've figured out a starting quarterback for my internet situation, and we're rolling along, brother. 600, 700 upload, download per second.
By the way, Daniil Calvino said Jamie Kennedy, who was the instigator of the Muschamp photo, was in the Facebook comment section a minute ago. Maybe he's still there now. I'm telling you, this is first person sourcing right here. This is like opening up the curtain and let folks see how it actually gets done. The guy who supplied the photo was in the comment section a little early. He may be gone now. Cisco Hurtado says, is Georgia getting a Rick Gilbert? We'll make this the last one. That's a good question by Cisco. At this point in time, at this point in time, I've kind of moved off the Gilbert thing. Maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't, but I've kind of moved off the Gilbert thing for now. I'm not even sure he's leaving LSU, to be honest with you. That's just my best guess. I did ask Terrence Edwards that last Thursday if he was leaving LSU. Terrence said maybe he stays. What is it, Jeff?
I was wondering if this was going to come up or not during our all things Gunner discussion today, but I guess I'll throw this on the table. Eric Gilbert was a 7-on-7 teammate at Hustle Inc. of Gunner Stockton. Those guys have got a camaraderie. They've played together. Lots of 7-on-7 seasons with Eric Gilbert and Gunner Stockton. There is a camaraderie. There is a vibe. They have a good chemistry there, should that decide to continue. But then, Brandon, I don't think you really want to be a part of any sort of Eric Gilbert narrative, or he doesn't show up in Athens till 2022 to play with Gunner Stockton anyway, right?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm a huge fan of Gilbert. I think he has a chance to be a very special player. There's just a few guys that I really like. Gilbert's kind of always been, one of those guys. So I root for him. I'd love to see him at Georgia. But this thing, I mean, there's nobody who like revels in rumor mill stuff more than I do. Put your ear to the ground, folks. That dog is just not barking right now. There are no Gilbert rumors. I mean, that's the closest I've gotten to a Gilbert rumor in weeks. The idea they once played in a 7-on-7 team together. That's as close to a Gilbert rumor as I've had in a while. Mike, I just think it's over for now. And I'm not saying it's over in terms of he's not coming, but in terms of this being a hot news cycle item, I just think that's done for now.
Yeah, it appears to be on hold since that legislation was moved back. The question is, what does he do this spring? Does he go through spring drills with LSU, and does he re-enroll? To my knowledge, he's kind of still out there in limbo.
I mean, Mike, that might add to the number of current LSU Tigers going through spring practice that Dog Nation might be watching very closely for what might happen after spring practice.
Well, that's the other thing, too. It's like, for all the supposed turmoil in LSU, none of these guys ended up leaving. Gilbert hasn't gone anywhere yet. BJ Ojolari, I guess, was never going anywhere. The whole Elias Ricks thing, I mean, maybe he was considering leaving, but he hasn't left yet. And if he did, it sounds like he'd be going to Ohio State anyway. You're talking about like a lot of wasted breath on just a whole storyline, none of which is coming true. That's certainly an example of that.
Yeah, Brandon, but that's your off-season content you love, right? That's your off-season content. You got 3 or 4 shows out of that, right?
Sadly, that's probably true. Connor, last word belongs to you.
Yeah, I just, we talk about BA speak it into existence powers. Obviously, the George Pickens comes to mind a few years ago. I was disappointed to see that he had actually wasted those powers on getting Topgolf to come to Athens and Sanford Stadium, as opposed to something, that actually helps the Georgia football team. I
got so many responses to this. People are like, "Hey, this is exactly what you said. It happened." Like, I was so happy about this. Honestly, I want to do a show from the UGA bookstore the week of the Topgolf Live thing. I actually want to go do a remote broadcast. I think that'd be a ton of fun. You're right. It would be a lot better to speak an actual football thing into existence. But listen, this is a pretty creative way to use the stadium. I got no problem with that. That's pretty good stuff.
Well, it's only appropriate because a lot of the Georgia season ticket holders are teed off.
That's pretty good, Mike. Now, that is good pun usage. I'm here for puns. I'll accept
Connor
them.
did not seem very impressed. He actually was.
I'm never impressed.
These kids today, no, they don't know anything about puns. Mike, I'm here for the puns. I like it. Well done. Hey, we're going to leave it there for now. Thanks for being here on Cover4 Live. Jeff will be with me on Dog Nation Daily tomorrow. Plenty more on Gunner Stockton on the website right now, dognation.com. Fallout from the schedule. Look ahead to what's next. There's always something going on. Dognation.com, the place to keep you up to date on all of it. Thanks for being here on Cover4 Live. We'll see you again next Thursday, and hope you all get ready for a great weekend, everybody.